Welcome to this quick hit episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Today, I'm joined by Roy Huntington, the publisher of American Handgunner and Guns Magazine. Hello, Roy.
Hi, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Of course. It's always great to talk to you. Well, you're always hearing from gun writers about the great 9mm versus .45 debate. But let's go to the other end of things. What about carrying a .22 long rifle for self-defense? We often get reader mail asking this question, so today we're going to share a few thoughts based on our combined decades of shooting and law enforcement experience. But let me say right out of the gate, we're not recommending you carry a .22 long rifle as the ultimate man stopper. But we also recognize that, if you financially can't afford a bigger, better gun, or you've got physical limitations that don't let you operate a larger caliber firearm, sometimes a .22 is all you've got.
And if all you have is a .22 pocket pistol, then you don't violate rule 1 of a gunfight, which is have a gun.
Exactly. And in the June issue of Guns Magazine, in my insider column, I make this very point that it's better than a big rock. And there's a fun little photo in there. I got a rock out of our garden, and it's got a Picatinny rail with a light duct tape to it to make that very point that, if you have nothing at all, a big rock is okay, but any kind of gun is better than nothing. And I'll share a preview of that. I tell the story of my very first backup piece. All I could afford as a baby cop was a Jennings J22. And you talk about not the ultimate man stopper, it's a lesser quality firearm, I will say. I don't think they make them anymore, but it was all I could afford on, my salary. And I learned a lot of lessons, and I was never very comfortable carrying it. But you know what? At least I had a backup piece, unlike many of my cohorts who at that time, they didn't issue backup guns. So at least I had one.
Brent, I'm sorry to say that maybe you didn't have one.
Well, I wouldn't debate it.
Just in the last issue or two, Mas Ayub did an Ayub Files, and it was on a Walmart shooting where a kind of a hero concealed carry guy came out and shot and took down a bad guy. Well, just as he was about to confront the bad guy, there was another bystander who came up and said, hey, I've got a gun. I'm going to help you. And so what did he pull out of his pocket? A Jennings 22. And yeah. And actually, but what happened was he ran the slide because he had it without a round in the chamber. Smart man. But when he ran the slide, the gun jammed.
Of course.
And so he was never actually involved in the ensuing conflict. So
yeah,
let that be a lesson, by golly.
Well, and I mentioned that I took the gun out to the range and ran a lot of rounds through it. And I discovered if it had too much oil, not enough oil, or wasn't, surgically clean, it was usually a 1-shooter or, maybe a 2-shooter. So that kind of goes to the first point we were going to talk about is understanding if you go with a maybe not a highest quality of a firearm, or you're using a very small firearm in .22 caliber, you got to know your gun's limitations. Things like the small size, it's probably got lousy sights, it's probably got minute controls. It's going to create problems for you, but you need to understand what those problems are before you pull it out in the Walmart.
Well, lest anyone gets their hair on fire and goes running down the street, screaming at the top of their voices that you and I have lost our minds, I want to reiterate that we're not saying to use a .22 for defense.
Exactly.
But if for some crazy reason you have to, and I can see that. I mean, you may have a battlefield pickup someday, or you may be visiting your brother-in-law and that's all he's got, or you never know. But you do have to keep a few things in mind. And number one is that while the .22 can kill, probably more people have been killed with .22 rounds, I would think, in this country maybe than any other caliber. But
I agree.
It's a long, slow death, and it's not anything that's reliable. And Will Dabbs, MD, our own resident physician, will tell you in his experience in his ER room, he's seen many .22 shots, wounds. And he said invariably they go in one place and then they bounce around inside and they end up lodged someplace else. And it's a very slow way usually to die unless someone gets, hit with a nerve or central nervous system shot. And so I think where you and I both agree on this completely is the fact that if it's the only thing you have, then that's okay. But learn to and understand what you're dealing with. And I want to reiterate what you said about 22s are usually profoundly ammo sensitive and how you manipulate the gun. So like you say, it's got to be clean. It's got to be oiled. Use good quality ammunition. Keep a firm firing grip. Learn to use the sights and realize that when you pull the trigger, probably not a lot is going to happen on the bad guy's side.
Well, when we were talking about the medical aspects, I was just sitting here laughing to myself, and we'll try not to go into too many operational briefs, but think about all the people we've pulled up on that. What's wrong? Oh, I've been shot, and they've been shot, and they're walking around, and in some cases they took the gun from the guy and beat him senseless with it. But and in a couple of cases, literally, I've had that where they died later, but they weren't incapacitated by any stretch. So you got to know that if you're going to carry one of these, I would call a sub-caliber gun.
And that even happens with bigger guns,
Sure.
I mean,
exactly.
One of our officers shot a guy and shot him 2 or 3 times. And I remember the video, the guy was sitting on the curb and he said, "Would you stop shooting me, please?"
Oh my goodness.
And
wow.
And like you say, though, not to tell war stories, but I responded to a call a million years ago, and it was a report of shots fired in a house. You've been there, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go up and kind of figure out what's going on, knock on the door tentatively, and this really big guy answered the door, and we said, "Was there a shooting here?" He said, "Damn right there was," and so we come inside and we were very careful. And so we looked around and we said, "Well, who was shot?" And he said, "Well, I was shot." And he lifted up his shirt and he had 5 little round holes in his torso.
Wow.
He had been shot 5 times with a 25 automatic. Now he was in trouble. He was bleeding out inside, but this was, probably, 20 minutes after it happened. And he sat down, he was drinking a beer. And
oh my goodness.
I know. So let that, nobody wants to be shot with anything. And so,
exactly.
But you can't rely on the fact that if you're going to point your RG-22 at some miscreant that he's going to run off in terror.
Yeah, it's truly a last ditch, double last ditch kind of thing. And, that's not something if you're in the fast food joint and they go to hold the place up, you don't necessarily need to intervene, even if you are fully equipped with your, $5,000 custom 1911, but that doubly goes when you're carrying something that is, shall we say, less than optimal.
And the challenge, I think, is that less than optimal thing. Yes, if you have a high quality 22, like a Ruger semi-automatic or maybe some kind of a double action revolver, maybe we can put the reliability issue to bed. I mean, I certainly have 22s that run very well.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think it's a bit like a J-frame or a small frame revolver. It would be in a defensive situation. It would very much be an expert's gun.
Yeah.
Now, there's internet stories about the Israeli Mossad using 22 pistols to assassinate people and all that. And, sure, if you can get that close and be that definitive, then that's maybe all you need. But like you say, if you're in the back alley and something happens, that's not the time to rely on a 22. Can I say, though, because we do talk to readers who are older and infirm and things like that, there are 22 guns, revolvers and semi-autos that are easier to run and that the recoil doesn't hurt people. So if you're really infirm or you have some kind of a muscle or bone or nerve issue to a recoil is really something that's painful to you, well, then I strongly recommend that you get a good quality 22 and learn how to shoot it, because like you said, it absolutely beats having a rock.
Yeah. And that's actually where I was going. It's almost like you read my notes or something that, if it's not a recoil issue, but rather an issue of operating the gun, the Shield EZ was a brilliant marketing thing. We've talked about it before. We weren't sure if that was going to be that big a deal, and it's a huge deal among folks that have arthritis and other issues. And instead of just settling for, say, a smaller caliber, you can still carry a real effective self-defense gun that you should be able to manipulate, reasonably well.
I think that's good advice, Brent, is don't think, I'm weak and I can't run this slide, so I better buy a 22. Stop and think. Maybe there are some other options. Things like the, 32 H&R Magnum or 327 Federal and a small frame revolver, like that Shield 380 EZ. Very easy to run. And I can't imagine anyone who is too sensitive to shoot a 9mm would easily handle a 380 easy in a full-size gun like that. And I think you had mentioned something earlier, which is, maybe there are some other options, like go to some kind of a long gun, go to a 410 pump shotgun for your home defense or something like that. But I think it's like if you were out working your trap line and you had your Ruger single action 22 and you were confronted by a rabid bad guy or a feral, Cro-Magnon man, and you had to defend yourself. Well, okay, go to work, do what you need to do.
Exactly.
But gosh, unless you're in situations like that, I'm with you. Is run away, and don't try to think I'm going to stand here and slug it out with my 22 unless you truly have no option. Because remember, the use of deadly force thing is, a lot of people forget, is they think it's not can you shoot him, it's do you have to shoot him.
Exactly.
I think keep that in mind. And so use enough gun.
Now, you're looking down on my Jennings J22.
And it is another thing, because if you go into a pawn shop or you go into some gun shops, and they usually have these either used Raven 25s and Jennings and Bryco, and the list goes on. They're real popular in the 70s and 80s. And they're $89 or $79. And if you're not really a gun person, you may think, oh, well, that's okay, that's a gun, then I'll buy one of those and I'll be okay.
Yeah.
But chances are you actually aren't going to be okay. And the guns are kind of inexpensive and they're not well made. And so don't fool yourself.
Yep.
You could outsmart yourself pretty easily there. There's what is that? There's that old saying about the two loudest noises in the world, or when you pull the trigger and a gun goes off when you didn't expect it, or when you just hear click when you expected a gunshot. And I think you'll get a click sometimes, because I certainly have.
And that was always my worry, carrying that backup piece of mine. And that kind of goes into our final point of, and save your money then to get a quote unquote real gun. I just today had to spend a whole big bunch of money to get new tires for my truck. And I was talking to the guy at the tire store, and I've known him and I trust him. And I said, he said, well, you can get this one and the less expensive one. And I said, I'm not saying that I'm a wealthy man by any stretch, and money is always an issue, but I've learned buy once, cry once. Especially when you're talking stuff important like tires or a gun that is going to defend your life or your family's life.
I was in my local gun store, Brandon's gun trading company here in Joplin, just a day or two ago. I was picking up a gun for an article, and he has a pretty comprehensive used gun case. And I always like to look at what he's got, because lets us know, what's happening in the market, what are people trading in and whatnot. And he actually had a pretty nice cross section of small frame, small caliber guns, 22s and 25s and 32s and things like that. And it struck me, since you and I have been talking about doing this podcast about 22s, that in looking at it, there were actually some decent, pretty nice little guns that he had that were very affordable. And there really is no reason to spend $69 on some cast zinc something, when for $149 you can get, a real gun.
Yeah. And I think we've made this point, and maybe we're beating it to death, but it's absolutely true. The low end guns now are on par with, some of the higher end guns of 10 or 15 years ago. CNC technology has gotten, so much better, and casting technology that, some of the price points on some of these striker fired 9mm, they're pretty decent guns, and they're not a lot more expensive than something you're going to buy at the pawn shop, and Lord knows what you're going to find.
Especially today, a lot of the major manufacturers, Springfield Armory and Remington and just at Ruger, just about everybody, they're always offering rebates, and they're all discounts to dealers and stuff like that. And it's not uncommon for me to be looking in some either a counter, the independent gun store, or a bigger store like Academy or Cabela's or something, and you see brand new, 380 automatics, brand new 22 autos, brand new guns like that for well under $300 and sometimes chasing $200. And like you say, because they're modern kind of CNC manufactured, they're almost always just great guns and they run like a top. So
absolutely.
So take your 22s though, have fun with them, learn about them and enjoy them. But, try not to rely on one for self-defense. Huh?
But again, as we said at the very top, what's rule number 1?
Have a gun.
Have a gun. So if all you've got in hand is a 22 long rifle, just understand the limitations, make sure you've got it cleaned, you understand all of its idiosyncrasies, you're well trained, and then save some money and get a better gun.
That's right. Yeah, and then go buy a better gun.
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad we got to talk about this because it is something that comes up pretty regularly in reader mail.
Yes. Well, thanks for listening to this quick hit episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. If you have comments or questions, please send me an email. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Remember, you can listen to us at gunsmagazine.com in the podcast tab or subscribe to us at your favorite podcast directory. While you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister publication, American Handgunner Magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. Whatever you do, please tell all your friends, even the liberals. On behalf of Roy Huntington, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent T. Now get out there and get shooting.